Welcome. We're now joined by Neil, the RockDoc. RATNER, how are you today?
Oh, I'm pretty good. How you doing, Jay?
Doing fantastic. Excited to talk to you. I know you got your book and your program coming out. Give us a little bit of background, how you got started on this adventure of what you do.
Well, you know, Jay, I've had this incredible life where I've met all kinds of people and done all kinds of things. And so I felt that I wanted to share it with people, share my stories, and share some of the lessons learned. And so for the past 5 years, I've sat down and wrote the story. And it's a story about really two different careers. One, wanting to be in the rock and roll business, and one, being a physician.
Now, how did you combine the two? As you became obviously a physician first, you had music as a love. How did you start to combine the two?
Well, actually, it was the music business that came first, because as a kid, I had this dream of being a rock and roll drummer. And so I played drums and I played in bands through high school, hoping that I would make it in the business. When I didn't, it was time to pursue the other dream as a doctor, but going to university in the mid-late 60s, music was all around, and it was easier to play music than to go to class. And then, serendipitously, between my sophomore and junior year of college, I took an apartment, a sublet in New York City, because I was in a training program to be an operating room technician, which I felt would help me get into medical school. Since there were so few spots in medical school and it was so difficult, you needed some sort of an advantage. And lo and behold, I took an apartment in the East Village of New York in the summer of 1969, and my upstairs neighbor was none other than Rick Derringer. And Rick and I became fast friends. He had pretty much ended the McCoys, although he was still living in the same building with Randy Hobbs and his brother, and they had hooked up with Johnny Winter, and he was becoming the guitar player for Johnny Winter. They were becoming the band for Johnny Winter. They actually became Johnny Winter and when I left that summer, Rick knew I could play, and I said, Rick, you're in the business, get me a job. And lo and behold, 6 months to a year later, he called me up, not with the job that I was looking for as a rock and roll drummer, but as a job, the job was to be the road manager for Johnny Winter's brother, Edgar Winter, in his new band, Edgar Winter's White Trash. And so I left school and started a 5 to 6 year adventure on the business side of the music business.
Well, rock and roll hoochie coo. There we go. The all-American boy leads you to...
you got it, man.
He leads you to Frankenstein. What do you know?
I was long gone by Frankenstein. By then I had moved on. So I was road manager for Edgar Winter for a while. And then after about a year, a little more than a year, we left on equitable terms. And then I got a job as a special assistant to a very well-known rock impresario named D. Anthony. And he was managing Peter Frampton, Humble Pie, Jay Giles, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer in America. And so I learned a lot from D. I went out and did box office with all his groups. I went on tour with all those groups. And eventually Emerson, Lake and Palmer came on board. I went on tour with them, and they liked my work so much, they said, come to London and be our permanent tour manager. And so I did that, and after doing that for another year, a year and a half, I formed a new concept, an all-in-one production company with sound, lighting, and everything that a band would need on the road. And I went back to Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I did the Brain Salad Surgery Tour, did a couple of other small tours, did some things for the Bee Gees, and then through an old girlfriend from college who had married the sound guy from the Pink Floyd, I got hooked up with them, and I formed, as I said, this all-in-one production company, and we were fortunate to be called in to do the Dark Side of the Moon tour with the Pink Floyd. where I had an epiphany and decided I had enough and should become a doctor.
Well, those were certainly the golden days, and two of the greatest progressive rock albums of all time with Brain Salad Surgery and Dark Side of the Moon.
I would have to agree with you there, man.
Yeah, but, you know, a golden era, you know, obviously Steve Marriott and Humble Pie and Peter Frampton about to embark on the Frampton Comes Alive era and, you know, all of that. And, of course, T-Rex with Mark Bolan. These are some of the rock gods.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, Jay? They are the rock gods, and we knew how good these things were back then, but you didn't know at the time what it was going to become. And as good as everything was, it was another tour. It was another day on the road. And now when I look back, I can't believe what some of these groups, tours, songs have become.
Yeah, I mean, you know they're talented, but you think it's kind of the norm, and then 30, 40 years later, you realize, like, wow, people are still borrowing, copying the Bowies and Bolans and Marriotts today.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, we knew it was good. We just didn't know how good it was going to be looking back retrospectively. Yeah,
I was just with Carl Palmer recently with his, you know, his kind of retrospective anthology on the, you know, the ELP days, and I spent some great time with Keith Emerson, you know, before he passed, and you know, they were super legendary. I remember hearing the stories of the California Jam when they headlined, you know, like 300,000 people out here, and you know, pretty amazing for a progressive rock trio.
Really, really, and in many ways they never got the credit, you know, that they probably deserve for having been such pioneers in that genre.
So as you get into, you know, the medical field, you obviously have music in your blood. Tell us about any of the experiences of you being able to help these musicians, you know, from a medical standpoint.
Well, you know, from a medical standpoint, the only musician that I really worked with was Michael Jackson.
Well, please tell us about that.
That was kind of a unique situation. You know, what I did was, after I went back to school, and then I had to go to medical school. I couldn't get into medical school in the United States. I went to medical school in Mexico, which was quite an experience, but not that unusual, because back in those days, there were many Americans. The medical school I went to in Guadalajara, Mexico, was actually the largest American medical school in the world, and it wasn't in America. But that's how many people wanted to be doctors and how few spots there were in the United States. But I took an unusual course. I wasn't sure what kind of doctor I wanted to be. Initially, I thought I wanted to be a surgeon, and after a couple of years of surgical residency, I switched into anesthesiology. And once I graduated from residency, I didn't want to be just a classical anesthesiologist, and I noticed that doctors in New York City were not operating in their offices because no anesthesiologists wanted to take that risk. And having been in the music business and being a risk taker, I felt that I was fully qualified to be that person to step out. And so I actually was one of the grandfathers in helping to create office-based anesthesia in New York City. As such, I did give anesthesia to a lot of celebrities and rock stars and things of that sort. But it was within the confines of whatever doctor they were going to, and of course, you know, I dealt with everybody on the same professional level.
Well, tell us about your experience with Michael Jackson and any inklings of, you know, the greatness, you know, you felt that he was.
You know, the situation with Michael was very unusual because, again, he just walked into an office that I was working in, and I had to give him anesthesia. And, you know, being a music guy like I was, you know, Michael and I hit it off immediately, and we became fast friends. And it was obvious that this was a unique when I would say, where do you get this stuff from, Michael? You know, how do you create what you create? And he says, Rad, I don't create anything. It just comes through me. And I've had that said to me by many, many great musicians, that they don't really create their great music. They're just somehow a conduit for the greatness that comes through them. So, you know, it's Michael Jackson, you know, and the first time I went on the road with him, it was quite an experience for me because I hadn't been on the road since the late 70s, you know, mid-late 70s. And I was with some of the most produced bands of that day, you know, ELP and Pink Floyd and whatever. And so to actually see the production and to see how Michael, in many ways, had taken that production to the next level, you know, there was pure genius in that.
Well, tell us about the name of your book and, you know, where we can find it online.
The name of the book is RockDoc, and I'll just tell you a quick story of where that came from. When I was finishing my anesthesia residency, I had had so many years in a hospital, I was kind of fed up with medicine, and I started to think again about the possibility of somehow getting into the music business. MTV was new. And I noticed on TV, all these different outlets had doctors, you know, NBC, CBS, whatever. And I thought, why doesn't MTV have a doctor who can give that generation of people some hip health information, so to speak? And so I came up with the concept of RockDoc. I was in the rock and roll business. I was a doctor. I felt I was the perfect person to be the RockDoc, and the concept would have been to do shows where I would do a story about some sort of a health topic that was relatable to that generation of people. Then I'd get a rock star to talk to me about that topic, and that would be the presentation. And I actually did one with Carl Palmer, of all people. Funny you should mention him. And he did a telephone interview, and we did a whole story, and I brought it up to MTV. I found a lawyer who knew the program director, and they loved it. But it was early MTV. They had no sponsors but the record companies, and so they had nobody to sponsor me. They said, get a sponsor, we'll put you on the air. Well, of course, I wasn't able to do that, but RockDoc was born, and then many years later, when I decided to write about my life, etc., it seemed the perfect title.
And the website?
The website, www.neilratnerrockdoc.com. If you look on the far left, you'll see Buy the Book. You can buy the book there, and you will get a personalized autographed copy from me, or go to Amazon. The ebook is available, the paperback's available, and the audiobook will be available in the next week to 10 days.
Our guest has been Neil Ratner. He is the Rock Doc. Please check out his book. Neil, it's a real pleasure. Can't wait till our next call and hear more about your adventures.
Jay, I really appreciate it. Thanks for the time.